Thank you, Aislinn. Thank you. Good afternoon. My name is Tiana Ridley-Padmore. I am a policy advisor with World Vision Canada, an equity and inclusion strategist, as well as the co-chair of the Anti-Racism Task Force. So today I wanted to give you all a high-level overview of the ARC collective commitment findings. I don't want to take too much time listing out all of the findings. As Aislinn mentioned, the link is available in the event notes, and hopefully you'll all have a chance to go through that and read the results on your own time. I do want to take this time, however, to unpack how we've interpreted the survey findings, and in particular, looking at 4 key takeaways that we've interpreted from the survey results. So the first takeaway that I wanted to focus on today was that the survey found that most organizations in the sector are not currently using proactive interventions to mitigate the effects of systemic racism in their human resource management. So for example, we saw that only 39% of respondents reported having anti-racist principles incorporated in their hiring policies, and only 51% of respondents indicated that hiring staff responsible have completed racial bias awareness or anti-oppression training. So in other words, there aren't clear anti-racist hiring policies in the majority of organizations, nor are most hiring staff trained in anti-racism, demonstrating a lack of proactive interventions in hiring processes. Secondly, we found that much of the anti-racism work being carried out in the sector is not being carried out by people with designated and paid DEI or anti-racism related roles. And we even saw that in the process leading up to the launch of this report. Many of us were working very, very, very late hours on weekends, emailing at 2 o'clock in the morning to get this work done on the side of our desks, in addition to our regularly paid roles. So findings showed that 84% of organizations, signatory organizations, have staff that are involved and are leading the anti-racism work in the sector, yet only 44% of those signatories reported having paid staff that were responsible for DEI or anti-racism related work. And this suggests that the work, the anti-racism work that is being done in the sector is being done on a voluntary, unpaid basis, in addition to regular roles and responsibilities, potentially without concrete institutional buy-in or proper considerations for time or resources or even adequate training. The third takeaway that I wanted to highlight today was that we found the sector has made significant efforts to improve power imbalances in communications, to examine implicit messaging and agency. However, these efforts seem to be ad hoc, as most organizations also reported not having explicit anti-racism policies or information chain policies. So for example, the vast majority, so 78% of respondents, indicated that their organizations had shared communications that were captured directly by in-country content producers. And yet, many respondents also admitted that though they collected and used content from in-country partners, those partners were rarely involved in the editing, approval, or review of that content. In some cases, partners may not even know that the content that they collected was being used in communications. And then finally, our final key takeaway was that our sector's approach to managing racial inequality has largely been reactive and ad hoc, though we do have a very strong foundation and willingness to move this work forward. So for one, we found that most organizations are guided by very clear mechanisms, such as communication and monitoring and evaluation policies that could potentially be leveraged to incorporate anti-racist principles. And anecdotally, the fact that so many organizations are joining this call today, that we've had 71 signatories in the first year of this framework, representing 320 organizations, the engagement that we had throughout this process demonstrates the willingness of the sector to move this work forward, which was really, really encouraging for our team. So we've proposed a set of 7 actionable recommendations to help address some of the gaps that we've identified and move us forward on the commitments. Now, I won't have time to go through all of these recommendations, but they are found in the report. But we, as you read through the report, we encourage you to reflect on where your organization sits on each indicator that we have surveyed, how our recommendations address the gaps you've identified, and align with the commitments, priorities, and opportunities within your respective organizations, and where you might be able to make movement on some of these commitments. And now, before I open it up to Q&A, because I do want this to be a bit more of a discussion, I want to note that this report and this process is a work in progress at the beginning stages of its potential. So our task force will be meeting this week to discuss learnings from the process and opportunities for improvement. Notably, we've identified a need to develop more intersectional measurements in the survey. We've identified a need to develop questions that dive a bit deeper into operations so we can take a more nuanced understanding of where organizations currently are. And we're also exploring opportunities to collaborate more closely with international partners in co-creating solutions and co-defining issues as well, recognizing that though racism and the effects of racism are felt internationally, race is a social construct that is very Western-centric. And the last thing that we want to do is recreate the same global hierarchies that have necessitated this process in the first place. And we look forward to continuing this important journey with you all. So I am going to stop sharing my screen and open it up for any questions about the findings or the report process that you may have at this time. Yeah, so I'm seeing that one question is asking about how partners haven't been included. And that's a really great question, and it's a complicated question. So this process, throughout this process, we tried to try to strike a balance between being very, very collaborative. We wanted to make sure that diverse perspectives, diverse organizational priorities and backgrounds, and also nationalities were incorporated in co-creating what the framework would look like, what the survey would look like, while also balancing that with the need to actually move and recognizing that at the core, anti-racism work requires action. And so throughout the process, you'll see that our timelines continuously shifted, and we kept pushing things back to make more space and more room for more voices to feed into what this piece would look like. So at this stage, we connected with representatives, and we put out an open call to any organizations in Canada's international cooperation sector that met the eligibility requirement to feed into the report. However, there weren't any specific actions taken to connect with our field partners in developing these pieces. And I think that was a shortcoming. Personally, I think that was a shortcoming of the process. And so as we move forward with implementing these recommendations and revising what the survey should look like, we do want to create space for that dialogue to happen on a global scale. One of the things that was also recommended in the report was looking at how the ARC Hub can leverage its resources to advance this work. And one of the things that we proposed was that the ARC Hub take responsibility for creating that forum and that dialogue to facilitate more global collaboration in this process moving forward. So I'm seeing the next question that says, many questions in the survey revolve around staff. How is it best to answer questions and measure when there's only one staff and most work is being done by volunteers? This was a point of discussion in the early stages of the process, we ended up revising a lot of our questions to incorporate staff. So most of our questions, for example, about collecting data, about training, they encompass both staff, partners, and volunteers. So volunteers are included in that. However, we also recognize that our questions, the origin of the questions pertain mostly to staff operations. And I do think that that's a really good point, Ruth. And perhaps in the next iteration of the survey, we can expand our questions to also focus on questions that get to the heart of the type of work that volunteers do more specifically. But all that to say, this data does also include staff experiences. I think we have 3 more minutes for questions if anybody else had something they wanted to share. So Tina Sweeney asked about racism as a Western construct, and speaking specifically as her experience as a Black woman who found racism in Dharamsala. Race is a Western construct, the concept of race, which is a social construct. But the effects of racism are very real, and racism is felt everywhere. So all that to say is that racial inequality, it transcends Canada, transcends North America. It's felt everywhere, but at the core, our conception and understanding of race and how we approach this work was very Western centric. And so if you go to different places and are traveling, different concepts of race and what those parameters look like might look differently. And so we just want to, again, strike that balance between recognizing that this work is focused on Canada's international cooperation sector, but it does have implications in how we connect and interact with partners on a global scale. And we want to make sure that the terminology that we're using and the approaches that we're taking and solutions are really co-created and inclusive of those different approaches to an understanding of race. But racism is definitely universal. Okay, so we are just about at time. If there are any questions that come up later or as you read the report, you're welcome to email our ARC at Cooperation Canada email, and we're happy to answer those. And as I mentioned, we're very at the beginning of this process, and I think there's a lot of room for improvement, but it's also really, really encouraging to see how many people have been engaged and have been championing this work. And I think that the impact that we'll have in the coming years will be really, really, really exciting. And so on that note, I will open it up to the panel to further the discussion.
Thank you, Tiana.